Hi, my name is Cheyenne Miller. I'm a community organizer with the Homes Campaign, and I'm also a campaign manager with the Metropolitan Women's and Urban League's Building People Power campaign and a community organizer with Network Delaware. I want to say thank you to the press and to the public for joining us via Facebook, and all people, regardless of their circumstances or background, should have safe and stable housing. It's a fundamental human right. Yet, too often, Delawareans are faced with situations of eviction that threaten their homes, their families, and their well-being. Even more often, people facing eviction are left to navigate that legal hurdle all by themselves, without official counsel or legal assistance in a system that's designed to protect landlords, not the tenants who rely on them for a safe and secure place to live. Delaware has an opportunity to level the playing field by securing the right to counsel for eviction defense statewide. Providing a right to counsel allows for people and families to keep their homes and communities, and in the time of a pandemic, promote public health. That's why, alongside our advocacy partners, we're launching the Delaware Right to Counsel for Eviction Defense campaign to take steps to resolving this racial justice, gender justice, and human rights issue. Partners on this campaign include the Metropolitan Women's and Urban League's Building People Power campaign and the Homes campaign, ACLU National, ACLU of Delaware, Community Legal Aid Society, Inc., or CLASSY, and the Delaware Volunteer Legal Services, Inc., and the Housing Alliance of Delaware. And our efforts are to pass legislation that would implement and fund the statewide right to counsel for tenants that are at risk for eviction, and to ensure that
Sorry about that. It looks like we are having some technical difficulties on Cheyenne's end. I'm going to ask Senator Brian Townsend to go ahead and hop on and let us know about the exciting bill that he is introducing along with some of our other representatives. Senator Townsend?
Certainly, thank you very much, Morgan, and I appreciate everyone bearing with us with the technical difficulties. But anyone who knows Cheyenne knows that she is definitely fired up and is going to be pushing all of us to. We stopped by Zoom technology for a few seconds here, but not on the path of progress. That's for sure. We want to appreciate everyone for being here today. I want to thank the ACLU. I want to thank CLASSY and the Delaware Right to Counsel for Eviction Defense for their advocacy and support of Senate Bill 101. Which State Senator Marie Pinckney and State Representatives Melissa Minor Brown, Kendra Johnson, and Larry Lambert and I introduced this week, along with several other co-sponsors. I'm not the first person to recognize that COVID has laid bare inequities in our society, and this includes longstanding injustices that are baked into Delaware's eviction process. Both the federal government and Governor Carney have taken important steps over the course of the pandemic to ensure that people who have lost their jobs or seen their hours cut during the pandemic are not forced out of their homes due to circumstances well beyond their control. But there's more we can do for the 18,000 households who face eviction in Delaware each and every year, whether there's a pandemic or not. We have an opportunity and frankly an imperative to rethink how the eviction process should work here in Delaware. And I believe we owe it to more than the 100,000 renters in our state to enact a fairer, more equitable system that will help vulnerable families stay in their homes when they face economic hardships. The reality is that the current eviction process in Delaware stacks the deck against renters in some very key ways. Right now, a landlord can force a family that is already struggling financially into homelessness over as little as $1 in back rent in a system that is so skewed in the favor of landlords that nearly 1 in 5 renters in the state are taken to court every single year. Due to the same social inequities that I mentioned, those evictions tend to disproportionately target people of color who are far more likely to be renters than homeowners due to long-standing income and wealth inequities. Senate Bill 101 will level the playing field for those tenants in several ways. First, we know that far too many tenants feel the system is so unfair. They don't even show up for their court hearing. And when they do, more often than not, they don't have legal counsel because, again, they're already struggling to pay the rent. Right now, only about 2% of tenants have legal representation in Delaware eviction proceedings, compared to about 86% of landlords who are represented in court by an attorney. This is a statistic that I think just shows how defenseless many families feel and frankly are when it matters most. Senate Bill 101 will address this lopsided power dynamic by allowing the Attorney General to empower a right to counsel coordinator to contract with nonprofits who can provide free legal counsel to tenants facing the greatest economic hardship, with priority being given to households with children and pregnant women, households living in poverty, and households in areas of Delaware with especially high eviction rates. Studies have shown that tenants represented under similar right to counsel protections adopted by at least 8 major cities throughout the US have resulted in tenants winning or settling their eviction proceedings in more than half of cases. I mean, bear that in mind. Essentially, once they have an attorney, they're winning half their cases. They deserve to win half their cases, but they are not enjoying the benefits of being on the right side of the law if they don't have attorneys to guide them through the process. Represented tenants are also twice as likely to remain in their homes as unrepresented tenants. Outcomes are even better when landlord-tenant disputes never reach the court. So Senate Bill number 101 will create a residential eviction diversion program that's modeled after Delaware's residential mortgage foreclosure mediation program, which has helped more than 62% of participants stay in their homes since that program was created in the wake of the Great Recession. Senate Bill 101 also would establish that eviction proceedings cannot be brought in Delaware for any less than $500 or 1 month's rent due, whichever is greater of the two. Currently, about 1 in 10 eviction cases in Delaware are filed over less than $300, an amount that often can be made up as soon as the next paycheck comes in. Finally, Senate Bill 101 would grant tenants a limited ability to stay in their homes if they pay all past due rent, as well as any applicable court costs and fees after a possession judgment has been awarded, but before an eviction takes place. And this is the kind of last minute reprieve that tenants could use a limited number of times in a given year. They couldn't keep using it over and over again. This legislation, is really important to note, is more than just simply about leveling the playing field. It's about our values as Delawareans and whether we want to live in a state that makes it as easy as possible to force vulnerable families into homelessness or housing instability, or if we want to be a state where an eviction is a tool of last resort, available only after every effort's been made to make landlords whole and keep families housed. I believe most Delawareans want a state built on fairness, equity, and compassion, and that's what we intend to enact with this legislation. I want to thank all my co-sponsors, my co-prime sponsors, and now I want to introduce and hand it over to one of the co-prime sponsors in the State House of Representatives, Representative Larry Lambert.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Senate Prime Brian Townsend for his support on this bill. I also want to start by thanking the community, thanking the wonderful advocates, including but not limited to Classy, ACLU, the Wilmington Urban League, Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League Building People Power campaign. There's so many advocates that have been fighting for this. And during these challenging times, when the pandemic, when the economic shutdown has led to an increase in economic hardships for our working families, we've come to this space where there's so many positives. We're returning to normalcy. Some of our barriers are being lifted as we get a hold of this pandemic. However, we're also coming into a space where many of our renters are facing eviction. I've had residents come to me with tears in their eyes, scared of evictions, confiding in me about the struggles that they've had, the fears, the nightmares that their children are having. Senate Bill 101 provides an opportunity for tenants to have access to legal counsel during eviction proceedings. As Senator Townsend mentioned, only 2% of tenants have access to legal counsel when facing evictions, when going to eviction hearings. This legislation is about economic dignity. Our working families have made significant sacrifices during this pandemic. These are the days, these are the times where we have to listen, where we have to step up and meet them where they're at. As Senator Townsend mentioned, when legal counsel is available, tenants win more than half of their cases. This bill really makes a difference. This is the type of transformative legislation that allows people to live in economic dignity. Like Cheyenne said, housing should be a right. We are taking steps forward to make sure that all of our Delawareans have access to legal counsel when facing eviction, but more so to take a comprehensive approach to make sure that all of our families are looked out for. And that's why I enthusiastically support Senate Bill 101. I stand with Senator Townsend, Senator Marie Pinckney. On the House side, my counterpart, Senator Kendra Johnson, Representative Kendra Johnson, Representative Mimi Brown. And I thank you for your support of Senate Bill 101. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Brian Townsend and Representative Larry Lambert, for those great remarks and for that great news. I'd now like to introduce Don Farrell. He's a small landlord in Wilmington and a community organizer with the Homes Campaign. We love Don. We have a brief video that we'd like to share with everyone with a message from Don.
My name is Donald Farrell. I'm a landlord and also a tenant rights advocate. I believe safe, healthy, sanitary housing is a human right. That's why I support Right to Counsel. Many tenants don't know their rights, and many landlords don't know their responsibilities or respect tenant rights. Many don't know what they can and cannot do, and more importantly, what they're supposed to do. Many tenants don't know how to exercise their rights, or when, where, and who to ask for help. If the landlord is unresponsible, then the tenant becomes frustrated and withhold their rent. The landlord ends up taking the tenant to court. The tenant may or may not show up. If they do appear, they're alone without any representation. The landlord ends up getting possession. The tenant gets evicted. The unit is re-rented without any improvements. Another family is victimized, and the cycle is repeated. Why should you support Right to Counsel? Because irresponsible landlords will be held accountable. Rental housing stock will improve. Landlords will save money by not paying for unnecessary filings or unnecessary evictions, and most important, clogging up the court docket. Tenants will be engaged early on in the dispute process, ensuring a more favorable outcome. Right to Counsel will also address the power imbalance between tenant and landlord by leveling the playing field and guaranteeing the tenant has representation in court. Homelessness will be reduced by preventing unnecessary evictions and family disruptions. I firmly believe that when a tenant satisfies a judgment, that case record should be expunged. I also believe that if an eviction filing is withdrawn before it reaches court, it should be expunged from the tenant's case record. These two measures will eliminate unnecessary barriers the tenant may face when they apply for future housing. Right to Counsel will also provide representation to tenants that experience sexual harassment, housing discrimination, or violations of the Landlord-Tenant Code. Come on, Delaware, do the right thing. Support, and let's get Right to Counsel passed. I know we can do it.
It's good to hear from Don. Now I would like to introduce Dan Atkins, Executive Director of Community Legal Aid Society.
Thank you, Cheyenne. Good morning. Class C is just extremely grateful for the groundswell of support in the community for this right to counsel bill, and ultimately for the vision and leadership from Senator Townsend, Senator Pinckney, Representative Lambert, Minor Brown, and Johnson for sponsoring this bill. We're also grateful to our colleagues at the Attorney General's office who are offering to lend their expertise and resources to being part of the solution by serving as the potential coordinator of the program. The Homes Campaign, the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, the ACLU, Housing Alliance Delaware, and many community members have worked really hard together over the last several months in response to some significant problems that are unique to Delaware that jeopardize low-income families and the communities they live in. An independent advisory firm that studies the eviction crisis around the country, the firm is called Stout. After analyzing 18,000 eviction cases filed each year in Delaware, released a report yesterday that illuminated these problems. Among the problems, from 2019 to 2020, Delaware experienced a 26% increase in homelessness. That is the largest increase in the entire country. A half of Delaware households are renter households are cost burden. That means they're paying more than 30% of their income on rent. A quarter are severely cost burden. That means they're paying more than half of their income for rent. Delaware's landlord-tenant system does not do enough to protect tenants. As Senator Townsend noted, 86% of landlords are represented either by a lawyer or by an agent, while only 2% of tenants are represented. This disparity is not unique to Delaware, but it's stark and it's pronounced here in Delaware. There's a huge gap between the demand for our services at Legal Aid and the resources we have to meet that need. We can only help a small fraction of the poor people who have civil legal problems, and that is a huge problem that exacerbates the crisis we're facing with rising homelessness and evictions here in Delaware. Senator Townsend spoke about the asymmetry in representation and the bad consequences that result. Stout actually found even that it was worse. They found that if tenants were represented, they would be 4 times more likely to avoid eviction. Eviction damages families in low-income communities and are extremely costly to the state of Delaware. The cost of providing tenants with counsel would be about $3.4 million a year. However, the cost of not providing tenants with representation is over $9 million a year. We cannot afford not to do this. We can't afford to do nothing. We hope to soon move out of a pandemic, but the effects of the pandemic have been severe. Lives have been lost, people have become sick, jobs have disappeared, hours have been cut. The issue is not whether we can afford to provide counsel to tenants, but rather we can't afford not to. The cost of eviction far outweigh the cost of ensuring that the playing field is level and that our landlord-tenant system is more fair. Now I'm going to hand the microphone over to Javon Rich, my colleague from the ACLU Delaware.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Dan, for passing the mic. My name is Javon Rich again, and I'm the policy advocate for the ACLU of Delaware. And just from the speakers here today and those viewing, it's very clear that all Delawareans, regardless of their circumstances or background, should have safe and stable housing, but that is not the reality. The reality is that there are disparities in who has access to safe and stable housing based on gender and race. So now I want to talk a little bit about lives. In Delaware, people of color disproportionately face the threat of being evicted. And when we think of eviction, the word eviction is very abstract, but to make it more concrete, at risk of leaving people without a house without a home, without a safe place to sleep, without a safe place to hold their belongings and the people that they love. For many reasons, including racist, economic, and housing policies and practices, Black and brown people are less likely to own homes than white people and are more likely to rent, something that Senator Townsend alluded to earlier. On average, evictions are filed against Black renters at nearly twice the rate of white renters. And the disparities are worse for Black women. Black women are more than twice as likely to have evictions filed against them as white people. And Black women are even disproportionately experiencing eviction filings and evictions more than brown households and households that are headed by Black males. Evictions as a whole further create a downward cycle of inequities. Many consequences that result from an eviction include homelessness or being unhoused, poor physical and mental health conditions, job loss, and an eviction record makes securing future housing, whether renting or a home ownership, nearly impossible. Evictions are further associated with emotional trauma, food insecurity, academic decline, and decreased life expectancy. We cannot forget that evictions impact families, adults, and children. And just imagine the impact that stable housing has on academic achievement and education equity. And many children are in foster care solely because their parents do not have stable housing. Evictions, in a sense, create a cost of family separation, homeless use, and again, children in foster care. So right to counsel legislation impacts social problems further than simply homelessness. That also, and these social problems that I just mentioned also disproportionately burden Black and brown people. The pandemic has exacerbated job and wage loss for communities of color. And with more people at risk for evictions, this could widen the disparity gap for years to come unless we make smart policy decisions now. So with that said, I think I've painted a good enough picture to say that it is very clear, very imperative to understand and know that a fair evictions process is a racial justice, gender justice, and human rights issue. The fact that 86% of landlords are represented by an attorney, agent, or business manager in eviction proceedings proves how invaluable representation is. It also shows that 98% of tenants are fighting for their right to housing alone. Providing legal counsel for evictions is a necessary step forward to not only address these longstanding inequities that have always put people of color and women at higher risk of eviction, but it increases the quality of life and saves lives. So please support Senate Bill 101. We've thanked our colleagues here, but I mention it again. Thank you to community advocates. Thank you, and I have an especially respect for people who have been fighting this battle to secure housing, keep their housing for so long, and I hope that this bill will be help for them. Thank you, Senator Townsend and Representative Lambert, for being leaders and joining us today and championing this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Javon, and thank you, Dan. And also thank you to the rest of the team who's doing such a great job on this. And we'd also like to thank all of the people that are in the Facebook and everyone who has attended this actual webinar. We'd like to take press questions. So we'll address any questions that have come through the chat or the Q&A. And if you'd like to ask a question that you haven't put through one of those features, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature so that we can give you the mic. Sounds like we have a question from Sarah Gamard.
Senator Townsend, do you expect this bill to pass this legislative year, or is it going to have to wait until 2022?
Very hopeful it passes this legislative year. I think we have obviously a serious bubble of stress, economic stress, and other stress in the community coming out of the pandemic. So my hope very much is that as more colleagues learn about how skewed the system is and what progress other jurisdictions have seen, that we'll be able to pass it this year. I also want to note Dan Atkins had made the point that we can't afford not to do this. And that's a situation that happens occasionally in terms of trying to reorient legislators' understanding of an issue, how important it is for us to take a step in this direction in order to have a whole lot better outcomes at a whole lot lower cost. So I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to make that case and people will see and feel how important this is. But so I appreciate your question, Sarah. I certainly would turn it over to Representative Lambert or Dan Atkins as well for any comments on that. But we're definitely hoping to make the push, and it's only going to be successful because of all these wonderful advocates that we've heard from today.
If you don't mind me asking a follow-up question, have you gotten any pushback from your colleagues in the General Assembly about this bill?
No pushback yet. We filed it yesterday, and it's going to be in the Senate Housing Committee next Wednesday, of which I am chair. Colleagues have noted a fiscal note would be necessary, but there hasn't been an immediate pushback because I do think there's an intuitive sense of from legislators, a sense of there being a whole lot of very unfortunate and negative outcomes, and ultimately avoidable outcomes when you have housing instability. So I think there's an instinctive instinctive support for the legislation, but I think also people understand that it is a very important change. It's a big change, but an extremely important change, and we certainly expect there to be dissenters, but no, there hasn't been the kind of formal pushback to say that this bill is not meritorious and that these Delawareans are not deserving of I think far more level playing field.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Sarah. I just wanted to briefly add that while the majority of landlords in Delaware are honorable, they do their work above board, as Don Farrell mentioned and other landlord tenant rights advocates have mentioned, there are landlords that have taken advantage of this pandemic. And that is why there's an urgency for this legislation to get passed now. We really appreciate the support of all of our advocates, as well as community members that shared this solution. But it is imperative that we address these issues now. As Dan advised, there is no time to wait.
Are there any other questions from anyone else? You can raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute. You can also submit through the question and answer in the chat function. We have one question in the chat. How will tenants be made aware of this option?
I can feel that, Senator. So the bill requires that tenants be informed of their right to counsel at various stages along in the process, from signing of the lease, when they're getting notice that they're going to be subject to an eviction, and then ultimately at the court. If they show up at court and they don't have counsel, the court will continue, meaning delay the proceedings to enable the tenant to obtain counsel. And we also plan to do a big push, canvassing push, and spreading the word in the community that we hopefully will have more resources and more ability to help more people. And so we're working with our colleagues at Network Delaware and the ACLU to embark on a large canvassing event to spread the word in particularly the communities that are going to be hardest hit, that have been hardest hit by this eviction crisis. And we know where those communities are. We know that the census tracks. We have that data from the court, and we know that these are largely communities of color.
I want to note too, following Dan's answer, that this is a multi-jurisdictional issue. We've been in touch with the Attorney General's office, who've expressed tremendous support for this concept and for the impact it can have on Delawareans. It involves working with the court system and making sure the processes set up and sort of the spirit behind them, that we're all on the same page. We've had good conversations with the court. So this is definitely a multi-jurisdictional effort. But we've been very happy by the level of engagement and support and openness from those other key stakeholders. And again, another reason why we have a very good reason to believe that this is a major step forward on the path to progress that we're going to be able to make in Delaware before long.
All right. Anyone else have any other questions they want to share?
I hope the questions are this few and straightforward on the Senate floor. I'll say that. I think it does speak to the fundamental nature of this initiative, and again, I think sort of intuitively why it makes so much sense, especially given the stark disparities between representation in court among tenants versus landlords.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Senator Townsend. Does anyone else want to share any final remarks before we close out?
It looks like we're ready to get to work.
All right. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you, everyone, for attending and participating, and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.